Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. Um, I'm Chelsea Cunningham. I'm a Programs and Engagement Manager here at SHRF, and I am going to be talking to you about the SHRF Mobilize Truth in Action Grant. Sorry, I lost my mouse. Before I get into the presentation portion, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that SHRF is located here in Saskatoon, which is Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. But we are a provincial agency and we serve all people of Saskatchewan. I also wanted to acknowledge that we're always working and committed to reconciliation. This funding opportunity in particular, while we are committed to supporting reconciliation throughout Saskatchewan and different initiatives, this is also part of our own commitment to reconciliation. And so a big part of this funding opportunity, is also me learning from all of you as the applicants as much as possible and figuring out how this application process can work for everyone in Saskatchewan and reduce some of those inequities and barriers that are still seen today. So a little bit of housekeeping before I get into the agenda. This session is being recorded. It will be available on SHRF's YouTube channel for viewing afterwards. There will be time for questions at the end, and we will stop the recording before those questions, so you don't have to worry about your questions being broadcast on our YouTube channel. I will also share the slides afterwards with everyone that has registered for this session. If you are watching this at a later date and would like a copy of the slides, you can just reach out to me and let me know. I think that covers how everything's gonna go. So I'm gonna get into a bit of presentation about who is SHRF in case this is your first time applying for our funding, a little bit about what our Mobilize grants are, and then more specifically on the Truth in Action funding opportunity. And then I will go into some of the more nitty-gritty details about who can apply, how you apply, and hopefully leave you with a few key takeaways that will help you in your application. This presentation is meant to supplement the application guidelines that are available on our website, so I still really encourage everyone to read through those as well before submitting an application. So SHRF, or the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation, is a provincial agency that funds, supports, and promotes the impact of health research that matters to Saskatchewan. So we receive our funding from the government of Saskatchewan through Innovation Saskatchewan. We also sometimes partner with other funding organizations, such as charities, in order to maximize our investments in research in Saskatchewan, but primarily publicly funded, which means our stakeholders are the people of Saskatchewan. When we say health research, we're referring to anything that impacts human health, essentially. So we go across disciplines, fields, methodologies. Typically, our common goals of health research are things like developing new medicines and treatments, strengthening the healthcare system, and just generally improving the health of the people of Saskatchewan. We invest our funding into research in Saskatchewan in a way that advances our strategic goals, which are to strengthen research capacity and competitiveness in the province, increase investment in research and innovation, and align research with stakeholders' needs. So our grants are designed to further all of these strategic goals, but today we're really focusing on that aligning research with stakeholders' needs goal. So the mechanism that we do this by is Mobilize grant. The purpose of these grants is to fund knowledge mobilization in relevant and practical settings, with the aim of improving the impact of health research in Saskatchewan. So knowledge mobilization is the term we use to refer to any activities used to bring awareness to research activities and findings in a way that can be used in practice. So there's a few examples listed here. In addition to the Truth in Action funding, we also run an open Mobilize grant call. If you're eligible to apply here, you're probably also eligible to apply there. And you are welcome to apply to both if you wish. A little bit more about knowledge mobilization. So far it's been emphasizing a lot on the research, but I want to emphasize that for us, knowledge mobilization is just encouraging exchanges in knowledge. So typically we want to see exchanges between researchers and knowledge users, or knowledge keepers and knowledge users. When we say knowledge user, we're referring to any individual who could receive and use new knowledge to implement improvements in health, whether that be at an individual level, a practitioner, implementing changes to improve the health of their patients, community organizations, policymakers, etc. For the standard Mobilize grants, these are 3 objectives that we've written to kind of try to encompass all the iterations of knowledge mobilization. So whether it's taking existing knowledge and moving it into practice, or taking relevant lived experience and traditional knowledges to inform research activities, or facilitate the participation of different team members in the knowledge sharing process. So that's what a Mobilize grant is. For this Truth in Action funding opportunity, I also have a few other definitions to add because we're really trying to open up the scope of this funding opportunity to be inclusive of all evidence, whether it's coming from the university research knowledge or from traditional knowledge. So something to think about is this definition of Indigenous knowledge translation that I've pulled, which all of what I just defined in knowledge mobilization, it sums it up very nicely into sharing what we know about living a good life. If that's not promoting health, I don't know what is. And then also I wanted to define reconciliation. We're using the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's definition of an ongoing process of establishing and maintaining respectful relationships. So we also refer to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action as actionable items for advancing reconciliation in Canada, and strongly encourage applications to very explicitly explain how they are addressing these calls to action. And encourage applicants to read through these if you haven't before. So essentially, this funding opportunity is funding knowledge exchange with the purpose of promoting reconciliation in Saskatchewan. If you take nothing else away from this webinar, that is your key takeaway of whether or not you are eligible. If the answer to that question is yes, you're probably good to go. But again, I'm always here for questions. If you have any questions about whether your initiative would count as knowledge mobilization or not. For the details of the funding available, so each grant can request up to $10,000 for 1 year. I do also want to highlight that you should consider this 1-year timeline as the ideal scenario timeline where everyone's schedules have worked out perfectly. There's been no delays, because we have no problems granting extensions. We know delays are usually inevitable. Yeah, things happen. Don't stress. If you're applying and you know that it's realistically not going to be finished in the year, don't stress about it. We are very forgiving with our extensions and timelines. And then deadlines. For this opportunity, there is no deadline. This is one of the barriers that I made a change in this funding opportunity compared to our other grants, so that our timelines respond better to the community's timelines. My only request is that you submit at least 1 month ahead of your desired start date. This is just so that I'm able to honor that start date and get things wrapped up in time. If you submit too late, I might have to bump your start date to the next month. And then a couple other notes. Right now, it's one successful application per principal applicant per fiscal year. Our fiscal year resets in March. So if you apply now, you'll be able to apply again next summer. The principal applicant can be a co-applicant on multiple applications, though. So if you're working on part of a team and you're the principal applicant on one, and another team member has a related initiative that you are participating in, you can definitely still be on that application as well, just not as the principal applicant. And I will be defining those terms, principal applicant and co-applicant, in the coming up slides. If you're interested in seeing the types of things that we have funded in this program before, we post all our funding announcements on our website. Looking through those can also be something that's helpful to figure out if your idea might be eligible or not. If there's something similar in there, that's probably pretty promising. And also I just like seeing, pitching this, that it's good to see what other people are doing in Saskatchewan. We're a relatively small community. It's nice to know what different people are working on and maybe connecting and sharing some lessons learned from similar activities. All right, so that was kind of the types of projects that we're looking for in this funding opportunity. So now I'm going to go into the actual eligibility of who can apply to hold this funding. So I talked about the principal applicant. So the principal applicant is the person who is responsible for the grant. That means that they are submitting all the information to SHRF, and if successful, they're the ones doing the reporting back to SHRF on the grant activities. The principal applicant definition for Mobilize grants is different compared to our other SHRF grants. For Mobilize, a principal applicant must reside and work in Saskatchewan during the funding period of the grant, not be a trainee in relation to the project that they are applying for. They must agree to adhere to all SHRF funding policies and reporting requirements, and have a position that supports them to carry out activities that promote evidence-based health knowledge and practices on behalf of their organization for the public benefit. So this is something that is the point that's specifically different from other grants. So this does still include university appointments, but this also would include positions at charities or not-for-profit organizations. And connected to that is you have to be able to get a signed approval page from the organization that will be submitting financial statements on your behalf. Whether that's your post-secondary institution, a registered charity, or an incorporated nonprofit. For post-secondary institutions, these are the institutions in Saskatchewan that have an agreement with SHRF to hold funding. So if you have a position at any of these, that is the route you would take. You would approach their research office and then they would set up the account for you. If you are a principal applicant coming from a charity or a nonprofit, you're still probably eligible, but there's a few other checks that I need to go through just to ensure that all our policies are being followed. So for charities, we need your CRA registration number, and then typically that is enough for our system. If you are a nonprofit, I usually also need some combination of documents, such as your governing documents, your certificate of incorporation, similar things. And I may also ask for information regarding your charitable status and experience receiving grants. As SHRF is also a charity itself, there's some CRA policies that we have to follow and just show that we've done our due diligence in assessing any risks of granting. And if successful, you will also need to be able to provide banking information to receive payment from the application. So we typically pay our grants in a lump sum in the first month of the funding term. And then each year, if you're done in 1 year, then it's just one statement. But annually, your organization would provide a statement of account to SHRF showing the expenditures that have happened within the year and the remaining balance. For charities and nonprofits, I do encourage you to contact me prior to application just to make sure everything is in order, especially nonprofit applicants. You won't be able to see the application in the system until I've edited your permissions. So if you go into the system and you don't see the application, that doesn't mean you can't apply. It just means you have to contact me first. And then so that's the principal applicant who's submitting the grant. But we also really encourage people to apply with a team. There is no set minimum team requirement, but that's not because that we're not hoping you have a team. The lack of team requirement is to keep barriers to a minimum so that you can show us your team and their roles on the project in the way that suits them best and works for them. So we're looking at applications that they're demonstrating engagement or potential to engage knowledge users and the target audience. And then this is a list of ways that other applications have met this requirement. But I'm open to working with you to make sure things are accessible and working for the community you're working with. So in-kind resources are typically very promising. It shows that the target audience or community is really invested in this and wants to make it happen. Letters of support are very helpful. Adding your community representatives or team members as co-applicants on the application is also good. We also accept just a detailed project plan describing how you will be engaging with them in detail. And I just really want to emphasize that no minimum team requirement, but these considerations are very important for the Truth in Action funding. Nothing about us without us is a good thing to keep in mind, and that's one of the things that will be looked at in your applications. So when I talk about adding co-applicants to the application, we have a few definitions of how people can be added onto the application to show that they are supportive or participating on the team. So on the application, you will be able to add individuals in one of these three categories. We have co-applicants, personnel, and supporters. Typically, co-applicants can't be paid from SHRF grants, but personnel can. So when possible, it's best to keep those clear and separate. So your personnel is anyone that's carrying out grant activities and being compensated from the grant funds. The co-applicants are contributing to the intellectual, cultural, or scientific direction of the project. So we consider these researchers, knowledge users, and people with lived experience. My big asterisk on co-applicants not being compensated from grant funding is for people with lived experience. You can definitely still provide honoraria for their time. It's typically just anyone with a research appointment shouldn't be being compensated from the grant funding because participating in research grants is a part of their job expectations. You can also add people as supporters. So these can overlap with people that could be co-applicants. But I typically define supporters as individuals who provide a more limited or defined role in the projects, or just have an interest in the proposed outcomes but aren't necessarily participating throughout the project. So if anyone is contributing to the direction of the project and actively participating throughout the project term, they're probably a co-applicant. If they're interested and supportive but not participating throughout the project, then they're probably a supporter. And then I just have the definitions for our three types of co-applicants again as a reminder. We already talked about the knowledge user, but we also include people with lived experience as co-applicants. So that's anyone who's supporting the project and providing knowledge of their own personal experience with a health issue or experiences as a caregiver. For expenses, generally the following are not eligible for Mobilize grants, but I do have limited power to approve exceptions. If you reach out to me, we can talk it through and see if that would be a possibility. But as a rule of thumb, overhead and operating costs aren't eligible expenses. It should be the direct project costs only. So if your project includes running a pilot of a program, the costs of staff running that program can be eligible. But the general overhead admin cost of running the organization probably aren't eligible. Equipment is considered not eligible. This is defined as things that have a useful life for the project team beyond the scope of the grant. So for example, if you're buying an iPad, but then the iPad is being left with the community afterwards, that no longer has a useful life for your team beyond the scope of the grant and isn't really equipment anymore. If you have any questions about that, though, just reach out to me, no problem. We're also not covering academic dissemination costs with these grants, since the focus is on non-academic settings. Things like manuscript publication fees, conference travel aren't eligible. Again, with an asterisk, though, that if this is involving someone who does not have an academic position, so for example, your team members with lived experience are presenting at a conference that is an academic conference, that is something that I would consider allowing. So as a general rule of thumb, just is any side of the knowledge sharing activity involving someone who does not have an academic position? If yes, then I could probably consider it non-academic dissemination and you're good to go. So the actual application, so you've got your principal applicant who's eligible to apply, you've got your team supporting you. And so the actual application itself is done on our online system. And so I'll be walking through the steps on how to access it next. But generally, there's a few documents that you'll be asked to prepare. This includes a project proposal of 3 pages maximum, 1-page timeline. So that's separate from the proposal, just to give you some extra space to explain when different milestones are happening. We also give you 2 pages for description of the roles and responsibilities for the team. So we don't ask any team members or co-applicants for CVs or resumes in this funding opportunity. So any information about their expertise or their lived experience that they're bringing to the project can be included within this document instead. Or if they want to write a testimonial or a letter, that can be uploaded in the supplementary materials as well. Supplementary materials, I also tell people to include your proposal references here. We do expect some proposal references, but they don't have to be extensive by any means. We also have 2 pages for the budget justification. This is the space where you can explain how you calculated the amount you are requesting from SHRF for this project. So things like the salary for your trainee and how that was calculated, or the contract to carry out the activities, different things like that. The budget documentation is similar to the supplementary materials, but this is where you can provide supporting quotes, etc., that back up your expenses as quoted. And then finally, there's the approval page to download and get signed by the representative at your organization that will be preparing statements for SHRF. If you're at a post-secondary institution, we do recommend approaching the research office sooner than later because they sometimes need a few weeks to get the approval pages turned around and signed for you. Okay, so how do you apply? So The online system that I refer to is our SHRF Research Management System, or RMS, as we like to call it. So it's an online portal. You create an account, log in, and access all the application information there. If funded, that's also where you do all your reporting to SHRF. I also have a few extra links here for your application support information. I mentioned the application package, very important, but we also have a funding guide and an RMS manual on our resource page that have policies that relate to all SHRF funding, and the RMS manual has some more step-by-step tutorials of how to access the RMS with screenshots, if that's helpful. So for setting yourself up and accessing the RMS, when you first go to that smartsimple.shrf.ca URL, if you're new to applying to SHRF, you'll have to register under new to the system. And then the most important first step is choosing which organization type is your affiliation. And so this is also where you'll be holding the funding. So if you're an MOU post-secondary, you would choose that option. If you're a CRA registered charity, you would choose that option. If you're a nonprofit that doesn't fall under either of the above two categories, that's when you choose other organizations. And then a few other notes on this. Other organizations isn't an auto-populated directory. We have to manually update it. So if you don't see your organization in the list, we probably just need to add it. And you can do that by emailing us with the name of your organization, and I think just the mailing address is all we need to get you set up. If you have gone through all these steps and you don't see the application form, it's probably because the permissions on your organization aren't set to see it yet. Again, just send me an email and we'll make sure everything is in order for that. If you already have a SHRF account, but it's not showing the right organization, we are able to add organizations to your same account. So that, again, something you can email us and we can sort it out for you instead of making multiple applications or multiple accounts. So once you're in the system, you'll be able to access the application form, and that is where you upload all those documents I already went through. There's a few other text boxes that can be filled in directly on the application form. And once finished, you submit through there. Once the application is submitted, it comes to SHRF for review. These undergo an internal review because we are looking for a fast turnover. We don't want you sitting around waiting for the funding results for many months. My goal is 1 month or less for funding decisions. So applications are assessed by the criteria detailed in the application package. The most important criteria, I want to emphasize again, is evidence that First Nations and/or Métis communities are engaged in a good way. So we want to see that this is really honoring the goals of reconciliation and addressing the calls to action, and working with communities to see what that looks like and building that ongoing relationship, rather than developing initiatives and saying, oh, look, we built something. We really want to see that teams are working together to address reconciliation and the many issues that have been caused in the past. So the review criteria, these are just an abbreviated form of the review criteria. I do have some more detail in the application package that is probably helpful to read through. But generally, we're looking at the quality of the proposal. This is mostly in terms of how the expected outcomes are clear and well-defined. So essentially, is it easy to read the application and know what you're planning to do with the funding and what you hope to achieve with it? Does the application embody the purpose of the Mobilize grant and the objectives of reconciliation? We also look at engagement. So are your knowledge users and audience clearly defined? Are the proposed activities relevant and accessible to the people you're hoping to reach? Do you have evidence of the resources required to complete this project? So in this case, it could be letters of support that your audience will use what you are hoping to do. And we also look at the outcomes and impact. So we're looking for potential for positive community impact and health outcomes. We also do hope that you have an evaluation plan, including information on how outcomes would be measured. This doesn't have to be super comprehensive. And obviously, a lot of these outcomes are longer term things that are very tricky to measure. So it's less about how you're measuring anything and quantifying your evaluation, and more about seeing that you've identified what might be some key indicators that you are successful. So whether that's positive feedback from participants, if you're doing something like a workshop, or uptake of the activities, different things like that, that show that in the short term it was successful and is set up to have those good long-term outcomes that you hoped for. So key takeaways. All fields, topics, stage of work are welcome to apply. And I do want to add too that we are a research foundation, but especially for this funding opportunity, almost everything is research, really. If you have knowledge that can help people be healthier and live better, it's probably going to fit. But we do want to make sure those application objectives are met. So your application should be in showing involvement of knowledge users, but we're very flexible in how this requirement is met. And then also be clear on how First Nations and Métis communities and individuals are participating. Again, we really want to avoid that perception of unilateral engagement where you're talking to the community rather than with the community. And then another note that applications will be reviewed by non-experts, so address terminologies accordingly. I would also add to this that not everyone is an expert in all fields, so it's also good to not take for granted that they know the context you're working in. So a little bit of background about your organization and what you do can also be very, very helpful. A few other general application tips that I've seen over the years. Showing is always better than telling. A good letter of support can really sell the potential for real-world impact, and especially in demonstrating demand in the audience that they want this work to be done. Also advise people to use the proposal space wisely. If something is repeating information from another section, it's okay to cut it from the proposal. So for example, you get 2 pages to describe the role and responsibilities and background of your team. So if it's relevant to the proposal and adding new context, great. But if you're just repeating that same information, you're probably okay to cut it from your proposal and use the space for other sections. I also recommend people focus the background on explaining the local context in which your project is working in. We're not assessing topics relevant importance to other topics. Yeah, we don't have to convince us that something is an issue typically. The main thing is you have to convince the reviewers that what you're doing is going to help with the issue, if that makes sense. And so kind of tied into that, one of the most important things for these Mobilize grants is that it's good to start with the desired outcomes and work backwards. So whatever activities you're proposing in your application, it should be clear that you chose those specific activities because they worked best for the context and the audience, not the other way around. Finally, this is our contact information. As I mentioned, I'll send these slides out so you have it. I'm here always for eligibility and questions about the program requirements. If you're having any issues with the RMS or the application form in that online system, Tanya does most of our IT support and can usually help get you set up there. And then I also have a few extra links of these resources that we've developed to help you with the application as you're working through it. So that concludes everything I had to present. So thank you for joining me today. I will be online for a while to answer any questions that anyone has. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing the applications that come in. Thank you.